Hey guys, it's Simon here, the Hobbies Man, once again, and today we're going to be doing a book review. Now, this book review is probably not going to come out until January, but I read this book in November. So, the book I'm reviewing today is Smilodon by Robert M. Kerns, who is a a varied science fiction fantasy writer. He has 3 different series that he publishes currently. One of them is Smilodon, and they're all published under Nightfall Press, which is his own publisher. So it's a self-published book. And the demographic here is adult, in the sense that I feel like it's a little bit more violent than your usual YA fare. And some of the concepts that it touches on, even if they're not necessarily explicit, are definitely concepts that would fall under the adult tag. However, any of those situations that happen to fall in that category are all fade to black. So you're not really gonna be exposed to anything too messed up if you read this as, like a teenager, right? However, everyone has to make their own choices when it comes to their reading, right? And, what type of demographic they read, right? So, yeah, in terms of genre, this is a shifter fantasy. This is a haremlet, although it is a very light haremlet. It's actually quite good, and it reminds me a lot of Michael Scott Earl's book ones, which have a certain kind of vibe to them, which is slightly different from what his second or third books in a series might be, which is the character meets the women, he establishes a connection with the women, but they don't really get into a relationship until later on in the series. So it kind of has that vibe to it. But there are 2 female characters that are interested in him throughout the novel, actually more than 2. And there is eventually a connection that is formed between them thanks to the shifter aspect of the story. And finally, it's an urban fantasy. However, that is, I think, in this case, a misnomer. But I don't really know that there is more of a cottagecore fantasy kind of vibe, or like a rural fantasy kind of tag. I don't think those exist, but or at least they have not been defined as such, right? But it is urban fantasy in the sense that there is a community, basically a town where shifters live, and the story mostly takes place there. This small place is kind of separate from most other areas, so it is kind of like a hidden world kind of aspect. It's like a grotto only for shifters, but they still interact with the real world normally, and so I wouldn't really classify this as like a very serious urban fantasy. This is a pretty light urban fantasy. If rural fantasy was a tag, I would use it. So yeah, in terms of adaptation, it does not have one, but I could easily see this being a CW show or something along those lines. And I think it's great. I don't say a CW show in a derogatory way. I don't mean that at all. I just mean that it's something that would pretty clearly appeal to older teenagers and young adults, people in their early 20s, which I am. So I think it works pretty well for that. And I would prefer a comic book. I always prefer comic books, but an anime as well would be kind of cool, but I don't think that this would ever kind of get there. But if it did, my preference would be for, an anime or a comic book, right? But I can see this being a TV show quite easily. In terms of a rating, it's a 5 out of 5. I do have one small complaint, but it is a complaint due to my preferences, not necessarily a complaint due to an issue that the writer has. So there you go. This is kind of a little bit too detailed, more detailed than usual, but I think that this book deserves it, right? So the premise here is that this main character, Wyatt, goes on a hike. He kind of has a loser end, kind of dead-end job as a programmer of some kind. He has a family to fall back on, and he actually could live without working, but he chooses not to. He doesn't want to do that. And so he decides to pursue a career. His career is kind of in the shedder right now. And so he goes on a hike to clear his mind, to kind of enjoy. And what happens is that he gets attacked by a cougar while he's on this hike. However, this cougar happened to be a shifter, and so when he and the cougar fight, the cougar bites him, and so he becomes a shifter as well. What else happens here is that it turns out that he turns into something that was not a cougar, something different. And of course, based on the title, you know that it's a Smilodon, but this leads to very interesting and fun and, you know, exciting shenanigans. So overall, the premise of this book is quite good. I like it. I think it's great. And with the first chapter and the title of the book, you kind of know exactly what's going to happen here pretty early on, and I like that. I think that is good. So in terms of the plotline here, Wyatt's in the mountains. He gets attacked, and then we get introduced to Gabrielle, who is another character, and she's the only character here that is actually clearly defined. Now, I have, you know, pictures of what these characters look like, and I have pictures of what they look like now in my head after having read Smilodon, Lone Wolf, and Ronk, which are the first two novels and the first novella in the series. So my mental picture of these characters has been developed by further analysis of their character, right? By further mentions of their physical attributes. But as of this first book, I didn't really know what these characters look like, and Gabrielle, I can't say Gabrielle. It doesn't sound correct when I say it, but I know that I'm not saying it necessarily super wrong, right? But Gabrielle is introduced, and she's the only one that has a clear kind of definition to her, which is she is tan, brown-skinned, actually, and in the sense that, like, a Middle Eastern person is brown-skinned or a Mediterranean person is brown-skinned. And she has dark hair. And that is because she's a melanated panther, right? She is a Black Panther shifter. And she gets introduced, and it turns out that she's a badass tracker and kind of one of the most important characters that we're going to meet, right? So she finds Wyatt. Eventually, she finds you know, the issue that he found himself in, and she takes him back to Precious, which is the kind of hidden area where the shifter village is located. And it's not really a village; it is a town. It is big enough to be a town, but she takes him there. Wyatt wakes up, and he ends up becoming a Smilodon, and it's really, really cool and badass. Now, the type of Smilodon he is Smilodon popular, or popularis, I can't remember exactly, but it is the largest Smilodon and the one that had the largest range. And so he is a massive Ice Age era super predator, right? And he's badass as fuck. He is a saber-toothed tiger the size of a bear. And he's actually slightly larger than your usual large Smilodons. I think there's a lot of detail that goes into this that actually matches very well with like the largest known standards of these animals, because, you know, there's like usually a range of these animals based on like calculations that you know, mathematicians do for the anthropologist and for the archaeologist, right? Which basically is like there's an average mass of an animal based on the different based on the different specimens that they have, and based on the way that the animal is made, you know, the way that its bones are structured and its muscles might be structured, you can kind of extrapolate a possible maximum range and a possible smallest range as well. So, you know, there's this size difference that can occur. And because he is a magical Smilodon, he happens to fall in the largest kind of range, right? And so I think that's cool. I really enjoy that. And so what happens here, it's a really badass first transformation, and we get introduced cold turkey, kind of like really shockingly into the society, and we have a lot of social growing pains going through the story here. Wyatt is a pretty standard guy. He happens to come from a specific lineage of wizards. However, he does not have wizarding powers. And I don't think wizards is the right terminology, but for all intent, they are wizards. And so he comes from this family. He's a Magnuson, and this brings with it a important aspect to his character, right? We get introduced to the Magi, who are the wizard characters that I was talking about, and we get to have kind of a big problem here. So the FBI show up. Children are being trafficked, and some of the children that are being trafficked happen to be shifter children. And so based on this idea, this document that the shifters and the U.S. government had at some point, that means that this falls under shifter jurisdiction, and they have to kind of deal with it, right? And so there's this coalition that forms. We get introduced to Carlene through Vicky, we get introduced to Carlene and Vicky through this coalition creation, and then we go off to solve the first kind of step in this issue, right? And so then we return. Wyatt happens to interact with some alphas. Now, alphas, in the kind of a real world kind of sense, don't exist. Like, alpha wolves are not a thing, and I don't think alpha lions are either. But because it's a shifter thing and magic is a thing, there is a alpha hierarchy in the shifters, right? And so this means that Wyatt accidentally becomes a leader through a show of strength, and then this leads into this big, massive battle, final confrontation, and then a little bit of a tease about where the relationship is going between the characters at the end of the book. I didn't really give you too much. Most of the stuff that I gave you is probably from the early parts of the book. And so all of the good details, all of the fun stuff I didn't mention. And I really recommend you guys read this book. The plotline is phenomenal. I really enjoy it. The writing style is great. I really like it. It's not overtly flowery. And it's not so simple that it's kind of boring to read. It is a perfect medium. It is the type of writing that I enjoy most. So I'm quite happy with that. So yeah. In terms of characters, we have Wyatt. And the only kind of mental picture I had of him at this point was that he was blonde. And that is because the Smilodon that he transforms into is Thawny, which is a kind of rusty, like, wheat color. And so he would have blondish hair, right? Then we get introduced to Vicky, who is also blonde because she's his twin sister. And because of their last name, I pictured them as very kind of like stereotypical Viking-esque characters, right? Something like Lagertha, or the actress that plays Lagertha from the Vikings show. Whatever that style of person is, that's what kind of I picture these characters to be, right? However, that's not really exactly accurate to what they look like, at least from the more experience I have with these books, right? Then we get introduced to Connor and Maeve, who are Wyatt and Vicky's grandparents. They're also Magnusons, of course. We get introduced to Gabrielle, Carlene, Alistair, Jace, Bunny, and a few other shifters. So Gabrielle is a panther shifter. Carlene is a wolf primogenitor, which is basically the dog equivalent of whatever Wyatt is, right? So Wyatt is a feline primogenitor, which means that he is kind of a fancy ancient shifter, and he is a Ice Age era big cat, and Carlene is an Ice Age era big dog, and so that's what they are. I'm curious to see how this works for other primogenitors, because that is one of the things that happens in the story. There is a development about primogenitors, and they all happen to be Ice Age characters and Ice Age creatures. However, certain types of animals didn't really have, or at least I don't remember if they have any Ice Age equivalents, but there would be some really cool ones. Like if we kind of mess with the aspect of real genealogy of these animals, we could kind of maybe connect a pig shifter with a hell pig, or an endentodont, I think is what they're called, which are these giant, like, mixed feeding, like, giant, like, dog pig things. They're like wolves that had hooves or something like that. They're very interesting animals. We could also kind of get like an Erasmotherian kind of rhinoceros kind of thing, which would be really, really cool. Maybe an elephant shifter that turns into a mammoth or a mastodon would be awesome. But there's a lot of different things that can happen like that, but I don't really know if that's really the case. I don't know if everything is supposed to be based on Ice Age American animals, right? Because America is not the only place that had megafauna, or at least mammalian megafauna. Of course, there's also Australia, and some of that stuff would also be really cool, but I don't know how Robert M. Kerns is trying to make this work, right? It seems like it is mostly American Ice Age megafauna, and I think that there's a lot of cool stuff that this can lead to, right? So I'm pretty excited about that in terms of these characters. So that was the characters, and honestly, that was also kind of the world building as well. But I do have some other characters to mention. So we have Hauser and Burke and Hector and Tammy. So Hauser and Burke are the FBI agents that connect with Wyatt, and they actually are pretty good characters. I quite like them. I don't remember who Hector is, but I'm pretty sure Tammy was one of the bad guys. And if I remember correctly, she shows up in later books. I don't remember exactly, so if I'm wrong, I do apologize, but there's a lot of characters here, and not all of them are that important, although a lot of them do have names. So there you go. In terms of world building, I think it's good. There's supernatural things being real. There's the inclusion of the idea that vampires and other supernatural beings are also real. Now, I don't know how this works because the shifters seem to be very, very powerful and have a very strong political tie to the U.S. nation, right? To the American nation, and so I'm not really sure how that involves all of the other creatures. And why there isn't more interaction with them beyond the Magi, because these shifters happen to be as powerful as they seem to be. They are mentioned to be immortal or near immortal for a lot. I like a lot of times in this book. So I understand that it's just Robert M. Kerns is trying not to interact with those things yet, but I feel like it would have been better if he just didn't mention it. And that's not really an issue that I had. It was just something that I was thinking about right now. But it mostly focuses on wizards and were creatures, right? You might call them shifters. You might call them therianthropes, whatever you want to call them, right? But there are some rules to these. Mostly natural shifters are better than turned shifters. However, that does not necessarily apply to primogenitors. And we don't really know what happens when someone turns like a primogenitor character turns someone else into a shifter. It's kind of unknown, right? So, and primogenitor characters are basically older versions, Ice Age megafauna versions of modern animals. And that's not exactly true, because a Smilodon is not actually the ancient version of a house cat, but it is kind of like the best approximation which we can get, right? Which is why I mentioned Hell Pigs or Terminator Pigs, and why that would be really, really cool to be used as a primogenitor creature in this story, right? So, overall, pretty good stuff. We also mentioned Merlin and the fact that the werewolves and the shifters and the Magi hide post the fall of Rome, and how that is related to something important, right? So, overall, pretty good stuff here in the world building. In terms of artwork and fan service, well, there's no artwork beyond the cover, which I really like. I think the minimalist design works really nicely. However, in terms of like a haremlet story, it doesn't work that well. Now, I don't necessarily think that a overly buxom kind of female character on the cover would work for this story either, which is kind of the meta for haremlet covers. I think that somewhere in between those two would kind of work nicely. However, I'm not really sure how to achieve that without it kind of looking kind of corny. So I think that whatever Robert M. Kerns decided to go with initially is good. I like these covers quite a bit. I really do enjoy them. I think they're nice. I would have liked to see some some artwork inside the book, but these are proper American or Western style novels. They don't really have any need for illustrations, and so I understand why they don't happen here. And in terms of fan service or adult content, there is none. There's only just brief glimpses of teasing and implication of these happening. However, they never do, and that is more or less one of the only complaints that I have with this book, which is there's two of them. The first one is I wish that there was a little bit more description for the characters. I actually emailed him about this. I emailed the author about this, and he told me, it's basically so that the reader has more ability to imagine the characters however they want. However, I really do think that for me personally, I would rather have more description than less when it comes to these characters, because I want to see what these characters are supposed to look like instead of what I want them to look like. And I don't really have any ability to make up characters if I don't even know their hair color, right? Which is something that was kind of crazy, that was never a thing that was mentioned for any of these characters. I didn't know that Carlene was black-haired until like the third novel. I understood that Gabrielle was tannish, brownish, and had black hair pretty easily from this first book because she was the only one that was described. And I also didn't really know what color Wyatt and Vicky had in terms of hair color or eye color or anything like that. I imagine Wyatt has green eyes and Vicky has blue, but I'm not really sure if that's true or not. And I would really like to have more description for the characters. I think it would be very, very nice. However, Brad and Kerns' style is not to give that, and so I'm just gonna have to deal with it because it's overall not really important, right? And in terms of the fan service thing, well, this is flown under the Hamlet banner, or at least people seem to accept it as a Hamlet story, and there is no mention of it being a Fade to Black story. And it's not even Fade to Black because they really don't even get to that point, right? And so I really think that with the fact that it's urban fantasy, with the fact that it's a shifter romance or a shifter story, maybe it's not a shifter romance, but it is a shifter story, and with the fact that it is a Hamlet story in the broadest sense of the of the title, I wish that there was a little bit more fan servicey kind of scenes to this book. Now, do I need them? No, not really, but I would have liked one, maybe two of these scenes that don't really have to be very long, just kind of have to be there to show that these characters are interacting with each other in this way, that they care about each other in this way, physically, right? But it's not important. It is kind of like my only complaint about the story. And like I said, it is not really a big complaint. And it is also not an important complaint. It is a complaint based immensely and uniquely on my perceived notions of what a story like this should have, not necessarily on an actual issue with storytelling that the writer had, because I think Robert M. Kerns actually has great ability to be a writer. And I really hope that he blows up and becomes a very, well-known writer eventually, right? So, ratings-wise, a 5 out of 5. More fan service would be good, but I don't need it. So, overall, those are my thoughts on Smilodon. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know what you thought. And thank you guys so much for watching. See you guys later.